Hi there. My name's Keith Mason. I'm Professor of Air Transport Management at Cranfield University, and today we're going to be considering whether Zoom has killed business travel. The background of this, of course, is that since the Covid-19 lockdown of the spring of 2020, companies have been trying to decide how best to continue their business. And what we found is that there's been a wholesale move towards Zoom and Teams as a way of conducting business. And consequently, I'm trying to assess whether the future for business travel in the long term is going to continue to be conducted principally over video conferencing, or whether that impact is only a short-term one. So, has Zoom killed business travel? Well, if we go back to the 1980s, companies were saying that that teleconferencing was going to be a key factor that would adversely affect the growth of business travel. And the global market for business travel was about 50% of all travel at the turn of this millennia. However, up until pretty recently, the impact of teleconferencing on business travel has always been assumed and predicted to have very small impact. So, evidence from the IPCC that suggested there was no chance that video conferencing would do anything close to replacing face-to-face meetings anytime soon, and up until 2020 may only have a 1% impact in terms of the demand for business travel. And that study was done by Oxford Economics as recently as 2016. So what's changed? So the first thing that has changed is that video conferencing has got much, much better. I think it's fair to say that necessity has been the mother of invention. And although the technology has been available, the technology has been improving year on year, but pulling the rug underneath the feet of business travelers has meant that they have looked again at the technology and found that it's much better than they remembered it to be. This has partly benefited from broadband infrastructure, which has got much quicker in recent years. Covid-19 strikes, companies look to continue their business, they look to retain their business. And so the question is, will small companies look to save money in the long term? Will large companies consider the different types of travel that they make and whether that is going to have an impact, or is that going to change the way that they continue their business? We have seen over many years downgrading from first class to business class, from business class to premium economy or low-cost carriers. And I think that when people have the ability to start traveling again, that there will be continued downgrading because companies will look to save money. But I think the impact of this new technology will be far more fundamental to the demand factors for business travel. How big is the business travel market? It's really hard to say. The problem is that the surveys that we have, or the estimates that we have, are based mainly on surveys done by local governments, by local airports, and tried to be aggregated. And the best estimate is that it's about 30% of the market. In the UK, the CAA estimates business travel to be about 20%. But what is clear is that the business travellers tend to pay more money to go on flights, so their value is higher. So let's get into this forecast. I've used IATA's 20-year forecast as a base case, and I've then applied that 30%. Business travel is 30% of all travel. Now, clearly, there is an ability to discuss this, and I think it's always worth reworking these numbers if there is better evidence of how big the business travel market is in 2019. And then I've taken the IATA growth rate and applied that as a base case over 20 years. So in 2019, IATA found that there was about 4 billion trips. 30% of those were business travel, and we are going to apply IATA's growth rate of about 4% a year over the next 20 years. Both of those can be discussed. In the short term, clearly the 2020 figures are going to be horrible, so I've taken a 90% reduction in 2020 and in the first half of 2021, and I've looked to return to growth in 2022. For all future demand, I've based that forecast on the purpose of travel. If we then look at the purpose of travel, we may be able to see that the behaviour of business travel I think may depend on the purpose of travel. Now, these are old estimates from KDS in 2009, and we can see that 45% of trips at that time were for sales and commercial trips, 21% for company support or customer support, 20% for conferences and expos, 10% for internal company meeting, and that figure had reduced by 30% over the preceding 5 years, and training at just 4%. So if we take those proportions and then try to make an estimate of what the likely future scenarios are, let's start, we may be able to make a forecast. So I've taken a base case where I think all future customer meetings will continue to be done face-to-face. Business travel is all about pressing the flesh and meeting customers, looking them straight in the eye. And I'm not sure that in the future, when the ability to return to travel comes, whether companies will continue to try and conduct meeting new businesses over video conferencing. So in my base case, I've taken 100% of customer meetings continue to be at face-to-face. Same for conferences and expos. You can't go to a conference or an expo unless you're at a conference or an expo, so those figures don't change. In terms of current customer support, maintaining relationships with current customers and making sure that those customers are satisfied, I think there is a significant opportunity to reduce that number. So in my base case, I've taken a 40% reduction. For internal company meetings, I've been quite aggressive. I think it's quite likely that in the future, most company meetings will be done over video conferencing, and consequently, I've taken 80% of that travel away. And from a very low base of 4% of all business travel, I've cut training related business travel down by 50%. And you can see that in the high case I've been slightly less aggressive, and in the low case somewhat more aggressive. Now we can discuss those figures, whether they're fair or not, but I just want to show you what that impact may have in terms of the future demand for business travel. And in that forecast, I then thought about corporate social responsibility and the impact of environmental considerations by companies in their future demand for business travel. And in my forecast, I've made a modest 3% reduction in demand over the years from 25 to 30, and a 4% reduction from 31 to 39. So here's the forecast. The original forecast from the IATA figure of just over a billion passengers for business travel, rising up to about 2.5 billion along the horizon of the forecast, but you can see that it's flat over the current COVID crisis. My base forecast takes in consideration the short-term impacts of COVID-19, a return to growth in 2022, 2023, but grows more slowly because some of that business travel has been replaced by video conferencing. The high figure doesn't drop quite as far, the low figure falls far more significantly. So over the time scale of the forecast, the number of business passengers will be just over 1.5 billion compared to nearly 2.5 billion on the base case, on the original forecast from IATA. And if we apply that environmental reduction from the low forecast, you are down to 1.25 billion passengers in 2039. So this chart summarizes what those figures are. The original IATA forecast for business travelers is somewhere close to 2.3 billion passengers, 2.4 billion passengers. The base case is 1.8 billion passengers, and the low forecast with environmental considerations is 1.3 billion. So just to finish up, what my forecast doesn't include is a consideration of the strength of psychological and cultural attachment to business travel. Do people really like going, traveling, pressing the flesh, all of those sort of things? This forecast doesn't consider that, and that might be something to discuss. It doesn't consider the growth or return of leisure, this conflation of business and leisure, which seemed to be over the last few years being a thing that was driving some more business travel. And it doesn't consider the generational shift from online and the preference and acceptance of doing things online by the younger generations. And so I think when we look at future forecasts for business travel, these factors, alongside those other shift towards video conferencing as a natural way of communicating, should also be considered. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and I hope to see you again. Bye for now.